Well, I will be the one presenting the situation in Latvia. I'm not from Latvia myself, but I've helped with the paper, mostly on the writing part. And the experts from Latvia are Andres and Vladislavs. I think Vladislavs is with us today. I'm not sure if Andres will be able to join, but they will be probably the one answering questions if you have any. Okay, so I will start on this presentation. So Latvia is a Baltic country with a population of about 2 million inhabitants. For the residential buildings, there are about 3,000 building permits that are delivered each year. 2/3 of them are for single dwellings and 1/3 for multifamily. And the non-residential buildings represent about 45% of the construction activity. The total investment, I think the data is for 2019, so it was 1.2 billion euros. So now I will talk first about the building airtightness. So in Latvia, the interest in building airtightness started in 2010 with the requirement of lower door tests for buildings renovated with the European Union funds. And then in 2015, the Latvian construction standard giving the requirements on thermal insulation and airtightness became stricter. And recently in 2021, the government gave recommendation to provide airtightness tests for the commissioning of all buildings that are larger than 5,000 cubic meters. The airtightness indicator in Latvia, so the one that is mostly used is the Q50, which is the leakage flow rate at 50 Pascal divided by the total envelope area, including floors. But the N50, so divided by the internal internal volume of the building, is also used for some projects. Now about the requirements in the regulations. So there are requirements in Latvia regarding airtightness. First, these requirements were depending on the building types. So from 2001 to 2015, there were requirements on that Q50 should be under 3 cubic meters per hour per square meter for dwellings, hospitals, kindergartens, homes for the elderly. Then under 4 for the public buildings and under 6 for industrial buildings. And there was also the requirement that there should be mechanical ventilation for buildings with Q50 that is below 3 cubic meters per hour per square meter. And then, as I said, in 2015, there were some changes in the regulation. And now the requirements are more depending on the ventilation system type. So the Q50 should be under 3 for buildings with natural ventilation, under 2 for building with mechanical ventilation, and under 1.5 for buildings with mechanical ventilation equipped with a heat recovery system. And industrial buildings are still allowed to have a bit higher air permeability, so the Q50 should be under 4 cubic meters per hour per square meter. And there is no longer the requirements to have a mechanical ventilation system for buildings with a Q50 below 3. The regulation has been updated in 2019, but there were no change on the airtightness requirements. So, as I said, there are mandatory airtightness requirements for all new buildings in Latvia, but there is actually no mandatory justification. So that means there is no sanctions in case the building does not comply with the requirements, and it is even not often checked, as we will see later. So there is only the owner, developer, or construction regulator that can initiate and write requirements to perform an airtightness test for new projects. So these requirements are usually described initially in the project documentation. So there are no sanctions, no justification needed, but there are still some incentives for building airtightness. One is that, as I said, in 2021, the government gave a recommendation to provide airtightness tests for the commissioning of all public buildings that are larger than 5,000 cubic meters. And one other important incentive is the fact that since January 2022, the city of Riga, which is the capital city, gives a 90% discount on property taxes for so either newly built detached houses that are classified as near zero emission buildings. So this 90% discount is for a period of 5 years from the commissioning of the building, or for apartments in multifamily buildings for which the insulation of all facade has been performed after its commissioning, and that the energy retrofit allowed to reach a level of energy performance that is better than Class C. And in that case, the discount is applied through the period of validity of the energy certificate with a maximum of 10 years. The building airtightness is also an input of the energy performance calculations, but the default values are the requirements that are provided in the Latvian construction standard. So it's the requirement I have presented before. So these values, they do not need to be checked, and they can be used as default value for the energy performance calculation. But it is also possible to use better values, so higher tightness levels, if a test is performed. In that case, a test is required. But these default values that are rather favorable are not encouraging for tightness testing. About the building airtightness test protocol, there are no national qualification scheme for airtightness testers in Latvia. Currently, there are only approximately 8% that are qualified by the manufacturer program RetroTech. Then there is 1% qualified by the German program FLIB, and 2% by the British program ATMA. And only some of them are testing buildings airtightness as the main activity. So there are not many testers, and therefore not many buildings that are tested. There are also no national guidelines to perform the airtightness tests. The test should be performed according to the European standard 9972, using the method 2 for the preparation of the building, so by closing all the windows, doors, hatches in the building. So here are the estimation of the percentage of buildings that are tested, even though there is no official data available. But the authors estimate that between 70 and 80% of public buildings, new or renovated, are tested. Only 5 to 10% of industrial buildings are tested. And for dwellings, it's also about 5 to 15%, so both for single-family houses and multi-apartment buildings, which have the airtightness that is tested. So to conclude on this building airtightness part, the awareness on building airtightness in Latvia is slowly growing. There are mandatory airtightness requirements, but no mandatory tests. So there are still very few buildings tested. Currently, the airtightness is stimulated by the taxes reduction for near zero emission building in the capital city, Riga. Changes can be expected in the future, but probably it has to be initiated by the European Union regulations. And now a few words about the ductwork airtightness. This will be rather quick because the ventilation ductwork airtightness is not really taken into account so far in Latvia. There is no national regulation or guidelines. There is no requirements on airtightness levels to reach. The reference document is the European standards EN 12237. And there are rare cases in which customers initiate a ductwork airtightness test. So yes, only rare cases. And there is not really progress that are foreseen in the next years.